So today's project is an example that sometimes what seems like a good idea on paper doesn't always mean it'll work in reality. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, a series where I try to make my own video games. So if game dev videos are your thing, consider subscribing to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Let's just dive right into things, starting with the player, who is a squid. A vampire squid in particular, because those things are just so friggin' cute. Left clicking will allow them to fire an ink projectile, as one would expect from a squid, and holding right click will prompt the player's squid buddy to swim towards the mouse cursor. And little fun fact here, this was originally flipped, with the squid propelling itself in the opposite direction of the cursor, but as you'll see later, that control scheme would have been way too chaotic in a bad way. Now the main scenario for this project is a boss fight with this little squid taking on a giant whale, which is arguably the largest sprite that I've ever created for a project. And as a quick aside, this whale is made up of 3 pieces: the skull top, the lower jaw, and the rest of the body. And just, oh, what the heck is this scene? These weird outlines have been showing up like a lot on my recent non-pixel art related projects, and I have no idea what's causing it. Like, is this a gamemaker thing or my image editor, you know? But weird graphics aside, the whale is a boss fight, so of course it's got some moves. The first being a standard projectile attack, which is this weird plasma ball of some sort. The second attack is a burst version of the first attack, so instead of a single projectile, the whale emits a flower-like pattern of plasma balls in all directions. And the third attack spawns little explosive krill that hone in on the player's position. Should the whale get hit by the player's projectiles, they will drop, well, pieces of itself. Because, you know, I mean, it's like a mutated zombie whale thing. Anyway, the player can collect these little bits, which will power up a hidden meter, and when full, the player will gain a white outline. Now, when the player gets hit by an enemy plasma ball or krill, one of 2 things will happen. If their meter is not filled, it's game over. Reset. However, a fully powered squid will instead create a ghost clone of itself, and these clones are there to do one thing: fire projectiles. And they're gonna need it because the boss is a hoss. I mean, it's a whale, so of course it's going to have a lot of health, 10 health bars to be exact, and so you probably see where the gimmick comes in. Hurt the whale enough to power up the squid, then intentionally take damage to spawn a clone that'll assist in fighting the whale. Repeat the process until the player is fighting with an army of ghosts by their side. And though they're not an army yet, if you enjoy my content, just know that supporting me on Patreon is the best way to help me keep making it. And doing so can get you access to exclusive content and downloads, and even early access to the weekly Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube. Now there's a second part to this fight, which occurs when the boss's health drops to the halfway mark. The attacks get even crazier and more chaotic, starting with, well, the only attack that I got around to coding, and I'll explain why in a bit. But indeed, this eye was meant to spawn and eventually fire a laser in the direction of the player. But as you can see, it's a bit stiff, and that was because it was at this point I stopped working on the project, and for multiple reasons. First, at this point, it was obvious that while on paper this idea was interesting, in practice it wasn't turning out as I had hoped. Perhaps the scale was the issue, maybe just my execution in general could have been done better. But by the time it came to work on the eye, the concept just felt like a wash. And not to mention, this was meant as more of a way to test some technical stuff behind the scenes, for example, large sprites like with the whale, and more importantly, recording player data for later use. So yeah, instead of trudging through something that I clearly was no longer enjoying, I decided to call it on this one and just chalk it up to a learning experience. Because some things were learned, which will hopefully be beneficial for future projects. But that is just my thoughts. I'd love to know yours. Good idea? Bad idea? What could have made it work better? And in fact, what's the last thing that you worked on that was a failure but, you know, ultimately helped you? Be sure to share your thoughts and stories in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. And with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.